Moving on. For our main story tonight, we'll be talking about climate change, or how all the cows are going to die in 15 years, and we won't be far behind. We all know what climate change is, whether you believe in it or not. But if you don't believe in it, you may find that you're keeping poor company.
I would note this chart on the right, which shows for the last 18 years that there's been no significant warming whatsoever. Now that's directly contrary to what the data set showed. Now, Dr. Titley, I noticed in your written testimony that you took a moment to address what you described as the so-called pause in global temperatures. By the pause, are you referring to the last 18 years of no significant recorded warming?
Now, that video is from 2015, before Ted looked like if Kevin from The Office tried out the late 1800s facial hair trend. But it is not uncommon to see Ted Cruz and many other Republicans in power using unsound data. Just look at how Dr. Titley, the man testifying, responds.
It's kind of interesting we started 18 years. We don't look at a 15-year data set or a 10-year data set or a 20-year data set. We look at an 18-year data set. But even if you do that, that's fine. Let's look at that. On me, I mean, I'm just a simple sailor, but it's hard for me to see the pause on that chart. So I think the pause is kind of come and gone.
Do you dispute the satellite measurement?
So with all due respect, sir, I don't know which data exactly your staff has, whether it's the first or second or third or fourth correction to Dr. Christie's data. We used to have a negative trend, then we had no trend, and now we begrudgingly have an upward trend. So looking at those data, you know, it's okay.
That's right. Cruz's data is wrong, and he's using it to push an agenda. The truth is that Earth's climate is rising, and it's due to carbon emissions created by human influence. This will result in rising seas, more natural disasters, and will eventually make the Earth uninhabitable. And when 67% of Americans agree that something needs to be done about it, it's a wonder why nothing is being done. Well, legislation has been proposed, but it just isn't getting the support that it needs. Tonight, we will be looking at climate proposals in the US and internationally, why they are or aren't working, and if there's any hope for the world. For starters, you may have heard about this proposed solution in the news recently after Texas shut down due to harsh weather conditions.
Joe Biden and Democrats better think twice about unleashing the Green New Deal on the whole country. Just take a look at what's happening in Texas.
So the point is you need to have a diversity of energy sources no matter where you are. And it couldn't be a greater example of that in the state of Texas right now. We got massive amount of wind farms out in West Texas that are frozen up. They're just like a propeller on an airplane. They froze up last night, no wind out there. All of that wind energy was lost. Think about if we were in the AOC world, fast forward 10 years and everything is solar, everything is wind, and you have this type of event, this type of, I mean, it's 9 degrees in Round Top, Texas. We're the same latitude as Houston.
Yeah, these people, go back to the Gender Studies Department, stay away from our power grid.
The blackouts that are in Texas are being made worse by the failure of wind turbines, many freezing in the icy weather, cutting output in half. And it's raising questions about the Lone Star State's increasing reliance on renewable energy. Herein is the paradox of the less climate agenda. The less we use fossil fuels, the more we need them.
Now, there's a lot to unpack with these clips. 1, that voice crack. 2, why is Tucker always making that face? 3, the amount of energy Texas gets from renewable resources is slim compared to the amount of fossil fuels they use. Why are we blaming this on the Green New Deal? That's right, you may have heard them mention the Green New Deal. Now you may be wondering, the Green New Deal has only been proposed and isn't in effect. How could they be blaming what's happening in Texas on that? If you had that thought, let me congratulate you. You've earned a prize for having more common sense than Tucker Carlson. The Green New Deal is AOC's plan for getting America on track to reduce carbon emissions to net zero by 2050. Just listen to her talk about what this resolution is fighting for.
I am sad to report that there is no middle road on the climate crisis. We will either address the problem meaningfully and in accordance with scientific consensus, or we will not. The statement is not a matter of radicalism, it is a matter of fact, of policy, and of science. And every decision we make between now and in our children's lifetimes will determine how human life will fare, whether we suffer greatly or build together. It is our choice.
She's right. Fighting climate change isn't about people like Ted Cruz. It's about who comes after us. Baby boomers aren't the ones who care about climate change. It's millennials and Gen Z, the ones who will have to deal with the ramifications of climate change. Yet, in the United States, most representatives and senators are baby boomers. These are people who simply don't have a stake in this fight, or people that come from states where fossil fuels are their biggest industry. But the Green New Deal is not an us versus them thing. It's been turned into political theater, but it shouldn't be. The Green New Deal's goals are simply to provide clean air and water, climate and community resiliency, healthy food, access to nature, and a sustainable environment. The biggest way that the Green New Deal suggests tackling this would be to rework our infrastructure, which is no easy task.
My plan was to search out the most critical projects that we could start with, then define how many jobs would be created by those, what the economic development benefit was, so that I could go up to Congress, give them the estimates, and then the following year go back and give them the actual numbers.
Slane was pumped to see the administration tackle this downward spiral until it became clear that his list of infrastructure priorities was not itself a priority.
When did you realize that the administration was kind of not taking your advice?
February of 2017. My list was shelved at that point. Their approach is to take most of the infrastructure, dump it back onto the states, and they know that the states don't have the funding. The states are not going to raise taxes, and it's a way to coerce the states into using public-private partnerships.
Now that was the plan under Trump, and as we can see, it hasn't gotten us anywhere other than no improved infrastructure and no real movement to attack climate change. Now that Biden is president, can we expect more support for the Green New Deal? Well, no. A big chunk of Democrats in Congress are moderates, meaning that they don't get anything done. After the Green New Deal had started to gain traction, more centrist politicians worried about playing into Republican messaging that climate-focused Democrats wanted to ban cheeseburgers and end air travel. Because that's what's at stake here. Cheeseburgers. Not the end of civilization. They want to take away your right to beef. This is the problem we see with the Democratic Party as a whole. There's a divide between Democrats and Republicans for sure, but Republicans mostly present a unified front. The Democrats are fractured by progressives, moderates, new representatives, and establishment representatives. As long as moderate Dems are in power, this radical Green New Deal won't be able to pass. Moderates are too concerned with bipartisanship to realize that they are hurting the people they are supposed to protect. Biden has said that he wants to put the fight for climate change at the forefront of his presidency. And his plan has become more aggressive since his campaign.
President Biden has quickly rejoined the Paris Agreement and revoked the permit to allow construction on the Keystone XL pipeline.
I was surprised at how bold this plan actually is. President Biden had some critics in the environmental community during the campaign who didn't think he was going far enough on climate in terms of the promises he was making. I think he's probably satisfied those critics with this climate plan because it really does incorporate bold climate action across every sector of American society.
Biden's plan does have legs to stand on. It might not be as progressive as the Green New Deal, but it could be enough to get the U.S. where it needs to be. With the slimmest of majorities in the Senate, however, this may be a lot tougher. One of Biden's key points was to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. This accord was praised as one of the best chances we have in fighting climate change, with 195 countries all signing on to it. This sounds great in theory, but there are still a few slight issues with the agreement.
So is the Paris Agreement then spending a lot of money and not doing any good?
Unfortunately, the Paris Agreement is a fairly small way of trying to do something about global warming at a very, very high cost. So the Paris Agreement, by its own organizer, the UNFCCC, so the guys who did the Paris Agreement, they estimate that the total impact, if everyone does everything they promised to 2030, will cut 1% of what it'll take us to just to get to 2 degrees centigrade. So fundamentally, it'll leave 99% of the problem still there. And the cost will be in the order of $1 to $2 trillion a year.
Yeah, the Paris Agreement basically does nothing. The way it works is that every country that signs on sets their own climate goals, with the main goal being reducing the global climate to 2 degrees lower than it was when industrialization began by 2030. As we can see, there are some issues with this, the biggest being that the country gets to set their own goals. Now, of course, no country is going to set goals that massively reform their entire system, especially when that system already benefits them. It would be like going up to your friend, telling them, hey, ice cream is bad for you. You should set a goal to eat less. And then they decide to eat 2 scoops every night instead of 3. Yeah, it's better, but nothing is really changing. The other issue is the lack of accountability. If a country fails to meet the, let's be honest, moderate goals they set for themselves, there's no consequence. Well, besides the impending doom of the collapse of society, which is kind of a big consequence. But that's in the long run. If a country fails to meet their goals, they basically get the international equivalent of your dad saying, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. The Paris Agreement has been praised as the biggest piece of international climate regulation, and yet this is all that it does. It's basically a participation trophy for your soccer team that got 7th place in a tournament. You tried. If the international system isn't working hard enough to fight climate change, what's a place we can look to that is? Well, look at this.
We want to become the first carbon neutral capital city by 2025. 62% of the Copenhageners use the bike for daily transportation.
By far their biggest focus is on energy use. It makes up about 80% of their carbon neutral plan. The residents here actually want to help build a sustainable city and are willing to work for it.
The citizens of Copenhagen, they demand a high quality of urban life. They are willing to do a lot themselves. They want to sort their own garbage. They want to bike to work. Citizens' involvement is key to the way we think in Denmark and in the Nordic countries. And that's a huge driving force behind being a carbon neutral city by 2025.
Denmark is one of the places leading the charge in climate regulation. As you can see by how they've been changing Copenhagen, it's working. Their emissions are down 40%, and that's quite impressive. But there are 2 problems with their goal to be an example. One is convincing America. America is the country with the 2nd most carbon emissions every year. So if you want to save the world, you have to get America on board with your plan. And America is not known for being on board with most of Denmark's plans. Just look at how Americans view their universal health care or their free college. It's not a right, it's socialism, and that's bad. The other point that was brought up in the video is how it only worked because the people were on board. They were willing to give up a little so they could have a better future. They are a collectivist society as opposed to an individualistic one. And if you really don't know where the US falls on that scale, just look at how we've handled the pandemic compared to other countries. You know, the ones that are currently enjoying concerts in each other's company without wearing a face mask. The US is the most individualistic country in the world. We care more about ourselves than anyone else. It's why we cut people off on the highway. We get mad when someone is holding up the line. Or we say wearing a face mask is infringing on our constitutional rights, despite it literally only being a piece of cloth that you have to wear around other people because you were too worried about yourself, and now we're a year into a pandemic. Sorry, still a little salty about that. But getting the US on board isn't even the hardest part. In front of the US is China, and China is quite a different story.
In the climate crisis, China is both hero and villain. Its staggering economic rise has been built on dirty development. China is dependent on coal, and today it's the biggest polluter in the world. We have evidence that coal power plants, supposedly cancelled, are once again under construction. But the country is also the biggest global investor in renewable energy. The Chinese Communist Party has thrown its mighty weight behind green technologies, bringing down costs for everyone.
China is in a weird spot. It is simultaneously working towards saving our planet while also being the main cause of its destruction. China is basically you when you see that everything in your life is going great, so you decide to tell your friend that you hate them to add some drama. China has said recently that they will reach peak emissions before 2030, with the ultimate goal of being carbon neutral by 2060, which is 10 years after most scientists agree we need to be carbon neutral by. But China is working against itself. As said in the video, coal is still producing more power for China than renewable sources. China has invested a lot into renewable resources, but they need to keep increasing their output if they are going to reach their goal. And the problem is that China has no real incentive to stop. They have one of the fastest growing economies right now, and they produce more products than any other country, namely honey. The world's economy has been entangled with China, which has led to a whole host of problems. But the main one is that China is becoming one of the strongest countries in the world. And if it's profiting based off of how they're running things now, why should they feel a need to change it? They began production on coal plants that they supposedly canceled. What other parts of their green plan will slip through the cracks to more efficiently maximize their profits and power? As you can see, there is currently a lot of issues with climate change internationally. There's disagreement on how we should be fighting it and how much effort we should be putting into fighting it. It's hard to trust in an international system where accountability is hard to come by and opportunities for self-gain arise. But I don't want to leave you on such a hopeless note tonight. Sometimes hope can come from the most unlikely of places. In this case, Will Ferrell.
Did you know that Norway sells way more electric cars per capita than the US? Norway. Well, I won't stand for it. Come on. Never mind. With GM's new Ultium battery, we're gonna crush those losers. Crush them! Let's go, America.
Yes, that is Will Ferrell mad at Finland for selling more electronic vehicles than the US. The implications for this are exciting, actually. One, when's the last time Will Ferrell was funny? It's been like a really long time. Will, if you're listening, I've had Step Brothers 2, Electric Brotherloo, written for 7 years now. Hit me up. 2, this is an American company mad that they aren't the best at something. Your first thought might be, American exceptionalism. And normally you'd be right. But this is good. America's desire to be number one should apply to fighting climate change. And if the government won't be the one to do it, the corporations are the next best thing. Because this shows where the mind of the consumer is. Americans are ready to buy products that are more green. Why else would GM promise more electric vehicles? Surely not for altruistic reasons. No, they're cheaper to make than they've ever been, and now there's room to make profit. And even if GM is doing this for selfish reasons, does it really matter? It's a step in the right direction, despite the intentions behind it. GM isn't the only company moving in this direction. Lego, a Danish company, has vowed to move away from plastic and make all their pieces out of sustainable resources by 2030. You have Bill Gates, who is effectively throwing all of his money into investing in ways to make the world greener, whether it be through experimental technologies, more renewable energy, burgers that look like burgers that aren't actually burgers. There is hope. Sometimes it's hard to believe it, but there is a chance that we will be carbon neutral by 2050. The international system may not be doing its part, but the will of the government is the will of the people. And as more and more people realize that we need to be better, the more that companies will change their ways, and the government is soon to follow. As I said earlier, it may not be for the right reasons, but who really cares? In 20 years, when I'm eating a fungus cheeseburger on an electric yacht and taking a nice breath of fresh air, I don't think I'm going to worry that it was also that GM could make more of a profit. Because I'll be alive and thriving, and you will be too. And it's all thanks to Will Ferrell. Good night, everyone.